Hi everybody, and welcome back to Kevin's Upfront Opinion today. So, I thought I'd do a video because it was the anniversary of my grandfather's death the other day. And it's not a day that I generally think about too much because I remember the day my grandfather died. I remember getting a phone call from my mother to tell me that he had died during the evening. Cried a little bit for about 20 seconds, wiped the tears, and then I went to work. Probably shouldn't have gone to work, but I went to work, and then the person I was working with told me just to go home. To be honest, I never went home. Went straight to the pub, which was quite ironic because my grandfather was a teetotaler. Okay, so I thought, what have I learned from my grandfather? Because everybody learned something from their grandparents and their parents. So I thought, right, it's 11 years since he died. He was 94 when he died, and he was probably the most important person to me in my life. If I actually look on, I'm 47 later on this year. Okay, and what? In a couple of months' time, I turn 47. So 3rd of August, I turn 47. And I thought, what have I actually really learned from him and his life? Now, if I was brutally honest about my grandfather, without slating him or anything, he was a guy that served in the armed forces. He served in the Africa campaign during the Second World War. He was in Italy. He was in Malta. Okay. He was a proud Yorkshireman, even though he never really considered himself as a Yorkshireman because he spent most of his life in the south of England. That's what he would say to me. What he'd have to say to other people, another story. But he also always classified himself as a southerner because he spent virtually his whole life in the south of England. And I remember him once saying to me, well, there's actually two things that always stick in my mind about things that my grandfather said. And it's relevant to me, not to most people, but to me specifically. One was, he said, don't ever bother going to work, which is quite ironic because he worked his entire life. And the reason he said it to me before people go off and say, oh yeah, another scrounger, was because I have uncontrolled epilepsy. He said, the state will look after you for the rest of your life. You won't have to worry about working. And I'll come back to that. And the other thing he said to me is two things to be able to get through in life. One is being able to farm the land, and the other one is being able to cook. If you can do them two things, you can get by in life. And my grandfather taught me to cook, and he also taught me to farm the land. I remember from an early age having to go on the allotment. I learned to absolutely hate potatoes at an early age, and the reason was because he would always have at least one plot which would be full to the brim of goddamn bloody potatoes, and every summer I would end up down there having to dig the damn things up. Bonus point was I also got to raid the raspberries and the gooseberry bushes that he grew that were at the end of the plot as well. And I'm quite partial to a gooseberry, I must admit. And later on in the year, the other side of the coin was I'd have to water goddamn pumpkins. And he used to grow giant pumpkins. And I remember one year he entered one of them, won a competition in the Southampton area. Took my sister down. She had a photo taken by the Daily Echo, and she ended up in the newspaper. Did she ever water them damn pumpkins? Like, how did she? She didn't mind having her photo done. Little Miss Glory Hunter, that is my baby sister. So my grandfather taught me those two main things. But when it comes to the comment about not working, I don't know if he said it to me because he damn well knew I'd go down and he was trying to use reverse psychology on me. Because from that day, I made sure I did everything I could to work. And even though I've been written off sick on numerous occasions, and in some ways he was right with what he said, because of the amount of seizures I do have, I am a danger to work in most workplaces. That's why I've worked from home most of my life, because it's a lot safer. But I've always gone out of my way to prove him wrong. Now, the other thing my grandfather taught me, and a lot of people would argue that this is something that he taught, because to me, he always taught that the most important thing was family. But he did it in a different way, because my grandfather was never a person that was well liked in the community or anything. He was a difficult person. He was a sarcastic git at the best of times. He's not the type of person that had loads of friends or anything, which would be a lot like me. That's why I say I'm probably an awful lot like my grandfather, because I could probably count on one hand how many friends he had, even up until the day he died. But the one thing he did care about, and he didn't go extravagant like some people would do, if your grandchildren came round, start grabbing hold of them, holding them and hugging them and all of that. It's probably something I have in common with him, because it's something I've spoken about in the past when it comes to my stepdaughter. But even though she's been in my life for 11 years, I've never given her a cuddle, not once. Never put my arms around her, not even on her wedding day. It's something I do feel guilty about an awful lot. But when she struggled, I've never put my arms around her just so she knows that everything's going to be all right, which you normally expect a father or a stepfather to do. But when it came to my grandfather, if anybody was ever in any trouble, if they actually needed something and they were desperate, he was always there, no matter what. If you needed somebody to speak to, or at least if I needed somebody to speak to, I was able to speak to my grandfather. And there's going to be a lot of people that knew my grandfather who are arguably going to disagree with me on this. Now, when it comes to that part of it, that's a lesson I probably learnt too late. And the reason I say I learnt it too late in some respects, was because obviously where I've had children with two partners, I never enacted it with my first partner. So I've never seen my daughter or anything, which I feel absolutely awful about. And I have for the best part of 16 years. But I managed to enact it and always put my kids first with my second wife. And what I feel bad for, and I don't like saying this, is I should have done it and learnt from my grandfather, which I never did learn from my grandfather on this, with my ex-girlfriend Sophie, who I had my first child with. And maybe one day, and hopefully very soon, we'll be able to fix them problems. So, you know, for now what I'm going to say is, let me know in the comments down below what you learned from your grandparents. If you learned anything from your grandparents, you know, something I spoke to my wife about, you know, and asked her, what did you learn from your grandparents? And she couldn't answer me, you know, and I'm sure that everybody should learn something from their grandparents. If they've had a ripe old life and you've been around them for long enough, surely you should learn or picked up something. You know, I can look on my grandfather specifically, but there are things that I learnt from him, and there's certain things I should have learnt from him, but I never enacted them. So let us know in the comments down below. Obviously, if you are new to the channel, please do follow or subscribe. But for now, thanks for watching, and we'll speak to you again a bit later.